Welcome to another installment of The Goddess Keys, where we unleash and unlock the tools and the jewels to support you with remembering what you've inherently always known, which is that you are God, Goddess in form, and you hold and possess and embody the key to awakening to your divinity. And I'm honored to be able to offer tools and jewels to support you on your path at this time. And in today's segment, we are going to discuss how to get yourself off of the cross. How do you uncross yourself? Take yourself off of the cross of the false matrix, which is related to sacrifice and is related to a lot of times you giving away your dreams, giving away your energy in the unconscious, and doing so in a way that keeps you in trauma loops, keeps you out of alignment with your true purpose. And today we are utilizing a very particular spiritual practice to support us with this idea of uncrossing ourselves or taking ourselves off the cross, which is Hoodoo. Okay, Hoodoo is a spiritual practice that was developed during the times of slavery in the African American community in the southern United States. Okay, now when I said Hoodoo, you got triggered at all, I would just ask you to consider what about that phrase was triggering to you. Okay, so interrogate that before you, before you kind of disengage from this topic, because there's a lot of gems and jewels to be learned about this particular practice as we think about this concept of uncrossing ourselves, okay? One thing I would say about Hoodoo is that it's more of a practice, a spiritual practice, and less about religion. Now, religion or different religious elements were embraced within the Hoodoo practice, and it was done so as a way of survival. So for folks who were enslaved in the Americas, a lot of times they had to find ways to transition their spiritual practices and beliefs, but they had to kind of hide them or mask them into more socially acceptable religion. Now, the thing about Hoodoo, which is really interesting, is that it mixes some elements of Christianity as well as some elements of shamanism, specifically working with the elements, working with the roots, working with the land in particular, okay? A lot of folks would say that Hoodoo is a very strong form of magic, okay? And I'm going to argue today that the reason why it's so strong, the reason why the spiritual practice is so potent is because it integrates polarity. It integrates the organized religion aspect and also the indigenous faith. It takes these two very polarizing types of spirituality and integrates them both together. Okay. Another thing about Hoodoo that's interesting to note is that it was developed in a time of really great constriction. This kind of spiritual practice was cultivated within the times of enslavement, okay? And it was a lot of the practices within Hoodoo was cultivated as a means of survival in very constricting circumstances, okay? So it was developed through the acknowledgement of society's constrictions developed through slavery and was also utilized as a tool to support with liberation, okay? And, if we think about one of the most famous people who led the abolitionist movement, we can think of Harriet Tubman, for example. Harriet Tubman was a root worker, okay? She would not have been able to be as successful as she was with her cultivation of the Underground Railroad without being a root worker, without her spiritual practice. She utilized divination, number one, to support her with knowing when to move and when to stay during her times in the Underground Railroad. She also utilized working very closely with the land. She had a very strong relationship with the land in order to lead folks to freedom and do so in a way where they were able to be nourished and sustained in their freedom journeys, okay? So she aligned with Earth in order to fulfill her mission. So this is also something to note as well. A big piece of Hoodoo is focusing in on what they call crossed conditions, okay? Crossed conditions is when basically you are experiencing some form of a hex, some form of an impediment on your freedom, some sort of a roadblock, and you need the support of your spiritual practice to break through these roadblocks, okay? So as I mentioned earlier, the Hoodoo practice was built upon the acknowledgement of many roadblocks and of many constrictions of life because it was cultivated in times of enslavement, okay? So it acknowledged oppression as being a way of life and utilized spirituality to break through the barriers of oppression. This is another reason why we want to look at the epistemology, I'm using a $5 false matrix word here, the epistemology, the theory behind the cultivation of the Hoodoo practice, because this is what makes this spiritual practice so strong, okay? Is that it, number one, utilized some of the information or the ways of knowing from their oppressor within their magical practice, and that helped them to be able to be more effective with a lot of their spirituality, okay? And on top of that, it acknowledged this thing around crossed conditions. So one thing that Hoodoo does a lot of is uncrossing rituals. You know, if you are experiencing crossed conditions, how do you uncross yourself, basically, to liberate yourself from the oppressions of life, okay? And that's a big thing that we're doing as we exit the false matrix, is we're uncrossing ourselves, okay? We're taking ourselves off of the cross. We're seeing all of the different sacrifice programs within the false matrix. We're choosing not to participate anymore. We're choosing to honor ourselves. We're choosing to liberate ourselves. We're choosing to uncross ourselves and to align with the new earth frequency, to align with earth, okay? So there's some parallels here that we can really learn from the Hoodoo tradition. This is not about embracing any kind of religious practice, but this is looking at the ways of knowing of a particular spiritual tradition and seeing how we might be able to learn from this spiritual practice as we exit the false matrix, because this spiritual practice was built upon liberation from oppression. And what are we doing when we exit the false matrix? We're liberating ourselves from oppression. Okay, so there are parallels to this. There would be Harriet Tubman would not have been able to accomplish her mission of abolition without her root work practice, without her Hoodoo practice, okay? So it's not just that she just happened to work with roots, or that she just happened to be really big in divination and then she also was an abolitionist. No, her spiritual practice fed into her work of abolition, okay? So this is another commonality that we can utilize, okay? So that's the first thing I wanted to share about Hoodoo and this concept of uncrossing ourselves out of the false matrix, taking ourselves off of the cross, okay? And looking at the epistemology, the ways of knowing that created the Hoodoo practice. So just to reiterate and summarize what I've said so far, Hoodoo is a powerful spiritual practice that integrates polarity. A big thing that we do as we liberate our consciousness is we also liberate ourselves from duality and polarity. The Hoodoo tradition was so strong because of its ability to integrate the polarities of both Christianity as well as more indigenous spirituality. Okay, and that's what made it so strong. The next thing is I want to actually read something out of, this isn't on the Aligning with Earth website. This is a book that you could purchase on the website. But this is a book from the channeling of who are known as the Grand Master Ancestors, the Syrian Grand Masters. So if you go on my playlist called Starseed Info, you can learn more about the Syrian Grand Masters and who they were. A lot of people who are awakening as starseeds will align with the Syrian Grand Masters. They were a very powerful group of beings who were on this earth at one point in time, and some of us do have access to that ancestral lineage. Okay, so I want to read something about what they mentioned about something that's known as the Polarity cross. Okay, and this whole Hoodoo thing is going to make a little bit more sense too after we hear some of the channelings from the Syrian Grand Masters. As humans enter the Polarity cross, they are pitted against one another and suspended in one of the four poles that then directs the dream of the life. Okay, so this is how these sacrifice programs work. Depending upon what geometry is running in your field, you get polarized to either be the person who's going to sacrifice or the person who is sacrificed. And sometimes you play the role of different poles depending on what group that you're in or what pyramid that you're in. Okay. Furthermore, gates open between parties moving around elements and patterns, along with karmic agreements and associated thought form, leading to extreme distortion in the attempt to ascend. So essentially what the Syrian Grand Masters are articulating here is that this polarity cross is not only held within our fields, but it's also held within certain soul contracts that we've just adopted or that our lineages have adopted for many, many generations to keep us on certain or polarized in certain parts of this polarity cross, okay? And then on top of that, there are different polarity-based thought forms. Once again, polarity cross. There are different polarity-based thought forms that are a lot of times held up within our consciousness, and this can be found in different etheric weaponry or etheric technology, etheric implants, psychic machinery, that sort of things, which once again keeps us very polarized and keeps us out of alignment with our growth and evolution. It says, all struggle to ascend can be summed up as the result of the polarity cross and how it presses humans into failed ascension. So there's a lot of channelings on the Aligning with Earth website about the ways where humans have tried to ascend and the different ways that humans have failed to have a complete ascension. And a lot of that has been done because of, these external forces, beings known as the false gods, for example, who have manipulated humanity. A lot of this has happened in the unconscious realms to keep us out of alignment with our growth and evolution. So I'm not going to go into all of the ways that ascension has failed, but there have been a lot of different ways that ascension has failed. It would definitely behoove you to check out how these ways might manifest in your life and to see what resonates with your ancestry, because then you can start kind of healing that karma, healing those patterns, and so that you don't replicate those patterns, okay? Those in the highest position in the cross fare the best. Those in the lowest position fare the worst, generally leading to ailments of some sort regardless of pole that one rests within. Okay, so essentially everybody on the polarity cross is at a disadvantage. Yes, there are some people who are at the top of the cross, and then, they might do better than the ones at the bottom of the cross, but nobody's evolving. If you're on the cross, no one's evolving. It doesn't matter if you're getting more perks, So let's just consider the whole slavery dynamic, okay? It's the same thing how, in slavery, there's this concept, particularly like when it relates to American chattel slavery, there's this concept around like the house slaves and then the field slaves, right? So there were the slaves that were working in the fields all day, and then there was like slaves that were in the house, right? And, some would say that there was it was better to be a house slave than a field slave. And there was sometimes the house slaves and the field slaves were pitted against each other and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, everybody was a slave, okay? Nobody had their freedom, regardless of what positionality you were in on the plantation. And the same can be said for the false matrix. And so a lot of people are waking up, some people I talk to are more at the top of the polarity chain, but they're ready to get off of the cross themselves, and then there's people that I talk to where they've been at the bottom of the polarity chain and they're ready to get off the cross too. Lots of people are sick of this, okay? Regardless of where your positionality is, people can feel the constriction of this and they're ready for something else, okay? The polarity cross is to be disbanded now. Those vying to ascend will notice that you may sit in multiple crosses in association with any spiritual group you have associated with, including churches. A lot of folks that I work with find that they need to leave certain spiritual organizations, or they're leaving some kind of a cult-like, guru-like dynamic. That's a big piece of the whole ascension thing. Is a lot of times you got to retrieve your power from different oppressive group dynamics, and you might find that you were pitted in a very particular part of the polarity, and you need to retrieve your power from that. So that's pretty common. Okay, that's a common thing. So if that's something that you have gone through or are currently going through, it's just a common thing that you're going to experience in this whole ascension process. Okay, another way to look at how you're positioned in these hierarchical structures is to look at something called etheric pyramids. And there are some downloads on the Aligning with Earth website related to the etheric pyramids. There's 18 of them that structure society. And so you would want to learn about these etheric pyramids. We all have different pyramids running within our field until we transcend that patterning. Depending upon where you're situated on the pyramid is going to depend upon the certain opportunities that you have access to as well. So disbanding those pyramids and also seeing what your positionality is on those pyramids is also really helpful to uncrossing yourself, okay? And if that's something you're interested in, there is a meditation on the Patreon around collapsing etheric pyramids, and you can basically check in on where you are situated on a particular pyramid so that you know what you need to deconstruct in your field. Highly recommend that. It's huge life improvement. It takes a lot of work. It's a lot of meditation. You eventually want to visit all 18 of those pyramids, but this meditation will guide you with doing that. There's also a subliminal on the YouTube around collapsing pyramids in your field. And so if this is something of interest to you as you work on uncrossing yourself, then that might be something you would want to check out as well. The polarity cross can be moved out of. The cross itself is held suspended in any field through magnets and mirrors that can be compressed through intention and will. So one thing that y'all have been hearing me talk about is this concept around the mirror effect, okay? Mirrors have been utilized and have been very much abused within the false matrix to keep us in a very distorted perception of self and society. Okay, there's been this like very distorted mirror system that the false matrix has been operating off of. Okay, so this goes back to the epistemology of Hoodoo that I was speaking to. Like, let's look at how the Hoodoo spiritual practice was created and what made it so powerful and so potent. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of it had to do with integrating polarity and taking some of the same tools that oppressed the people who cultivated the Hoodoo practice. And, they found a way to use the cross and to empower themselves through the cross. And then they created a whole set of practices around uncrossing themselves. Okay. And they utilized the cross too within their spiritual practice. But, the cross had a very different meaning for somebody who was a Hoodoo practitioner and somebody who was a traditional Christian. Okay. If mirrors have been utilized to keep us imprisoned in the false matrix, then we also want to utilize the mirror as a gateway to freedom. Okay. So that's one thing. The next thing, magnets. I haven't spoken too much about the magnet piece, but yes, magnets have definitely been utilized within the false matrix to keep us imprisoned. You've heard me talk a lot about the magnetism of the great central sun and how we're becoming more magnetic and less electrical. All of this is true. However, as you've heard me mention many times, the false matrix is a system that has been based upon inversions. Okay, so a lot of times they're going to utilize some of the most powerful aspects of reality and find ways to invert it, okay, for their own benefit. Okay, and magnets is one way that the false matrix has been structured and kept in place. Magnets have actually kept us splintered in time. This is kind of how like timeline manipulation happens a lot, is through magnets, interestingly enough. Okay, and so that would kind of make sense, right? Like if we think about a cross, also timelines. When we think about timelines, we can think about vertical lines and horizontal lines. I did a download months ago on this, on like how to look at time and angles and that sort of thing. But yeah, magnets have been utilized a lot in the etheric realms, have been utilized to mess with our concepts of time and to keep us out of a state of timelessness. In all actuality, the time is now. And yet a lot of times there are parts of us that are frozen in the past and are repeating the same trauma loops from the past because we're literally stuck in the past. And sometimes this is held through our fields with magnets. So we would need to go in and demagnetize those magnets and bring ourselves into present time. So that's one thing that we'll be exploring in more depth this month on the Patreon in particular. So stay tuned for that. And on top of that, a meditation where we go into literally uncrossing ourselves and seeing specifically where these magnets might be held in our energetic field. This uncrossing meditation is definitely going to focus in on the magnet piece. Okay, so hopefully y'all are following me. Okay, I'm going to reread that statement and just tie it all together real quick. It says, the polarity cross can be moved out of. The cross itself is held suspended in any field through magnets and mirrors that can be compressed through intention and will. So one thing is we need to know where the mirrors are. We need to know where the magnets are. And then we're able to reclaim our power from them. Our intention is very strong. The thing about it, though, is that there are so many ways that we've been manipulated within this false matrix system that we have no clue about. Okay, so we're not able to intend our way out of the things that we don't know about, right? But once we know about how the mechanics of the false matrix works, then we're able to set the intention and reclaim our power from it. Okay. So if magnets and mirrors have kept us ensnared in the false matrix, then we can also utilize magnets and mirrors to liberate ourselves from the false matrix. Okay. And this is done through either the mirror effect, sending back different forms of like projection within our field. And so that I've done content on that. So check out the content I've done on the mirror effect. And I'll go more into how we can utilize magnetism as a way to reclaim ourselves from the false matrix as well. So it says, there are large angel gates that form between sectors of the cross, and this then draws parts of one's field and thought form to another, and parts of another towards oneself. This is taking me back to the download I did a while ago. I'm going to try to find it and link it if y'all are interested in learning more about timeline manipulation and the false matrix. But one thing that I talked about as it relates to looking at timeline manipulation in the false matrix is that you need to learn how to command the angles or command the angels. Okay, not all angels are for us. Okay, not all angels are for our liberation, and that's a whole other download. I'm not even going to get into all of the famous archangels that we're taught to basically worship and call on for help and assistance. I'm not going to get into it, but I'm just going to say once more, not all angels are for us. Okay, and there are angels that are not in alignment with Earth ascending. And sometimes they are holding together gates, and they're holding together gates at this polarity cross, and they are basically positioned at different angles. Okay, so we also need to learn how to command the angles or command the angels. Okay. So if you want to learn more about that, check out the download I did on timelines, okay, and navigating timelines in the false matrix. So just to clarify, these angel gates are basically opening the gates so that you're giving away certain information in the unconscious, right? Or other people are receiving certain information in the unconscious realms. Okay, so sometimes these angels are more partial to certain beings than others. It says, generally, whoever is pitted against oneself in whatever cross one is held suspended within is the one that is traded with the most. The trading leads to an impurity of truth and thought form that cannot possibly lead anyone home. And it may be this pattern recurring each ascension cycle that has led to extinction in other creations in this region of domain. As each ceases to be in any cross, then one is free to retrieve all that has been lost and return all that one has taken on to become whole and complete within. Once again, nobody wins if they are on the polarity cross. It might look like certain beings are winning, but nobody's winning. Everybody's in the slave system, okay? Some people are just house slaves, others are field slaves, okay? It's that same concept, all right? The false matrix system is a system built upon enslavement, all right? So at some point, even the people at the top of the cross are going to get tired of being on the cross at all. And we're actually starting to see that happen. It's going to be more and more. We're going to see more and more of this because it takes away from your truth. It takes away from your true essence. It's the same reason why we're seeing like a lot of members of the elite or quote unquote elite who are not necessarily thriving right now. Okay. Even though they might have all the access to the material wealth and the resources that the false matrix tells us is what makes us happy and what makes us whole and complete, they're still, their mental well-being is not there. Okay. And we're seeing some travesties happening as it relates to the quote unquote power elite, because they are also tired of being on the cross, and they also get sacrificed being on the cross. They might get more perks, but at the end of the day, they are also being sacrificed. Ascension home into the new dream requires that all parts of one's own field are manifested from one's own ancestral DNA and not from another's. So as we've been on this polarity cross, and this is just something we've been born into, right? Just the way like how, slavery has worked a lot of times. Sometimes you're just born a slave. You don't get to choose like, oh, I'm going to be a slave today. Like, no, you're just born into the system, right? And if you're able to free yourself of it, that's great. But a lot of times you have to go through a lot of trauma and drama to free or liberate yourself from this. Okay. It's the same kind of concept. All right. But if you're on this polarity cross, then you are a fractured version of yourself, because a lot of this system of enslavement has been kept up and running by keeping us out of alignment with who we truly are, swapping ancestral lineages in the unconscious, swapping dreams in the unconscious, swapping a lot of different stuff in the unconscious, so that we as a human species had no choice of ascending, and that we remained fractured, and that we remained imprisoned and indebted by the false matrix system. I'm going to say it again. No one wins in this, okay? Some people might get more scraps than others, but it's a slavery-based system regardless. It says, if parts of one's field have been traded in a polarity cross, then those parts that are not one's own will be left behind. And if this is enough of one's field, then one will most likely become ill and perish. The great central sun is a wholeness dream. Therefore, one must be whole and complete within oneself in order to enter. Wherever one has failed to become whole and complete will become ill unless rectified prior or following entry. If your family, if your ancestry stays on this cross, stays in this sacrifice system for long enough, things get lost. Consciousness gets lost. Information gets lost, okay? And until we get ourselves off of this cross collectively, then we're going to see more of that happening. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there at this moment. I know that's a lot to take in. I'm also going to leave the link for this full book if you're interested in learning more about what the grandmasters, the Syrian grandmasters, have channeled as it relates to our ascension, and things that we need to keep in mind as we return back to wholeness and holographic ways of knowing. If you're interested in going deeper into this whole dynamic of uncrossing yourself, I am offering a lot of resources this month on the Patreon as it relates to what I'm calling the ultimate reversal spell. How do we take ourselves off of the cross and reverse a lot of these crossed conditions? Okay, so there's some advanced soul retrieval for folks, and I only recommend people participate in it if they've already been doing soul retrieval and they're ready to kick it up a notch. If you've never heard of soul retrieval, or if it's something you've been curious about, or but you haven't quite experienced it yet, I'm going to leave a link below to a soul retrieval meditation that I created on YouTube that's free for you to experience and dive into, and get your toes wet as it relates to soul retrieval. If you've already been doing soul retrieval and you know that there's more work to be done to uncross yourself, there are resources over on the Patreon, as well as a decree that is there for folks who are ready to get off of the polarity cross. Okay. And if you are interested in diving deep, I am currently offering coaching journeys for 3 months and 9 months, and am launching a deep dive coaching program for 12 months starting in 2025 for folks who want to engage in a 1-year coaching journey, as well as a retreat, an in-person retreat, one-on-one with me to support you with your liberation journey. So if that sounds like something that is of interest to you, then reach out to me. I'll leave my contact information below. Sending you lots of love, joy, peace, prosperity, and abundance. Until we meet again. Bye.